Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. My name is Hannah Fairbank, and I am the Asia Regional Coordinator for the GEF Secretariat and a Senior Biodiversity Specialist. I'm so excited to be helping to facilitate this event this morning. You can see up on the screen here that the title of our event is The Vital Role of Rangers in Achieving Global Biodiversity and Development Outcomes. So this morning we will hear from a diversity of voices, both those who are advocating for rangers, working with rangers as government counterparts, also Indigenous peoples and local communities. And we'll talk a little bit about the vital role of rangers in meeting the draft Target 3 of the Global Biodiversity Framework in a way that is inclusive and effective. So I won't take any more airtime this morning. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Dr. Claude Gascon, who is the manager of the Global Environment Facility Programs Unit. Claude?
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. On behalf of the Global Environment Facility, it's a real pleasure to welcome you to this very important event, the World Bank GEF Global Wildlife Program event on the vital role of rangers. Yesterday, at the same podium, I introduced an event on the Inclusive Conservation Initiative, where I mentioned, rightfully, that Indigenous peoples and local communities were the most important stakeholders for the effective management of protected areas, and in fact had a disproportionately positive role in that effect. Coming a close second in the importance of a stakeholder group for the effective management of protected areas are obviously the rangers. And this whole event today is to recognize this and to actually get some great examples from this program that we've been running. Unfortunately, the role of rangers, although it is very important, is most often under-recognized and under-equipped and underfunded. And so these are people who are extremely dedicated, who often come from local communities, from neighboring and surrounding areas of protected areas, and they are trying to do their job under very difficult conditions. And if that wasn't enough, there's a danger and a very high risk associated with these positions in many areas around the world, where there's illegal activities going around, whether it's poaching, whether it's mining, whether it's logging. These people have to confront a huge front of risk and danger, often with no equipment and no power. Rangers also play an extremely important role in the liaison with the local communities and the surrounding communities of protected areas. Often they come from those same areas, and they in fact have a role not just in the enforcement of what's happening within the boundaries of the park, but actually bringing the communities into an understanding of the importance of these areas for their well-being and for their livelihoods. Now, to counter this, of course, huge investment or collective investment is needed in supporting rangers all around the world. And this project will show you, this program will show you how we've been doing this in ways that are hopefully going to be long-lasting and sustainable, so that the work of these rangers can actually meet both the important demand of managing the biodiversity and the carbon stocks and water that are managed and included in protected areas, but also ensuring their safety and their flourishing role as important members of communities in these surrounding areas. So I won't take much more of your time, but just to show that these investments are the culmination of many, many years of investment of the GEF. As I mentioned yesterday, we've been investing in IPLCs for 30 years. We've culminated into a program with the Indigenous peoples, which actually empowers and supports financially these organizations. In the same way, we've been investing in rangers in projects since the inception of the GEF 30 years ago. We now have a program that includes rangers as a central feature of that. And you'll hear about the great work, and I'm especially excited to hear about a lot of the work that we've been doing with the women rangers in some of these examples. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claude. That's great. Thanks for kicking us off so nicely. So first, just a brief overview of our event today. So we'll start with a word from two organizations that are working for ranger welfare and have a nice video about that topic, and then a facilitated panel from a variety of voices as well, and then time for question and answer and discussion of some of these important issues. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Rohit Singh, who is the Director of Wildlife Enforcement and Zero Poaching for the World Wildlife Fund. Come on up, Rohit. And Chris Gallier is the President of the International Ranger Federation. Come on up.
So I'm going to kickstart this presentation. So this photo, I started my career 15 years back in WWF in a park on the border of Cambodia and Vietnam. The place was famous as Serengeti of Asia because in 1960s, when the first scientists came, they saw 6 tigers in a day. The place was full of prey species. This tiger was photographed on the Cambodia-Vietnam border in 2007, and that was the last tiger. Now, the context here is, this park is 7,000 square kilometers with 100 rangers. And one of the key reasons why we lost tigers there, not enough people to monitor and protect. In 2022, we released this paper. This is the first ever census of how many rangers are there in the world, especially in the protected areas. So there are more hairdressers in the UK than rangers in the world's protected areas. There are more people working in golf courses and country clubs in the US than rangers in the world's protected areas. One ranger on an average is managing an area equal to 13,500 football field. So it's just not possible. So when we talk about global commitments, biodiversity protection, we have to keep in mind the human resource that you need to deliver those targets. To achieve the absolute minimum density, the world has to recruit 1.5 million rangers. And it is a great opportunity to bring inclusive conservation, bring more IPLCs, make more participatory management. I want to quickly show you some of the initiatives we have taken as Universal Ranger Support Alliance, which is an alliance of 8 conservation organizations. As I said, we did the first ever census of how many rangers are there in the world. We did the first ever report what can be done at site level by park managers and rangers to strengthen relationship with communities. We have done the first ever gender report on rangers. There are only 3 to 11% women globally in the ranger workforce. And the turnover rate in female rangers is 95%. They leave the job within 6 months because the enabling conditions are not there. There are recruitment barriers. There is no career progression. Then we are working on first ever minimum employment and welfare standards for rangers in collaboration with the International Labour Organization. Because when we talk about ranger working conditions, we are talking about labor rights. But International Labour Organization doesn't even recognize ranger as an occupation. Even in the UN occupation list, rangers are listed under arts and entertainment along with circus workers. So when it comes to policy, we are way behind. We are working on safeguarding policies. We are developing the first ever global competencies for ranger, what a competent ranger looks like. And then we are also working on Ranger Code of Conduct, which Chris will talk about it. And then overall what we are trying to do is change the narrative on rangers. It's not only about law enforcement and protection. It's not only about guys in uniform. It's about being that bigger role, playing that bigger role as a planetary health workers, as educators, as researchers, as guides. So we are trying to reframe the ranger narrative. I would like to end with a short video that explains the work we are doing.
Firefighters, teachers, police officers, first responders, all are professions worthy of support and honor. We invest in them for our collective health and safety. Rangers are tasked with the same duties, and they're responsible for safeguarding the systems upon which our entire planet depends. We need to invest in rangers like we do other frontline professionals. The Universal Ranger Support Alliance is bringing together an international coalition of conservation organizations to advocate for a global ranger action plan. It will help all rangers, ensuring that urgently needed tools, reforms, and policy changes reach them. Invest in rangers to protect natural resources, to help grow sustainable national economies, to strengthen communities, to ensure equality and equity in the ranger sector, and to secure the health of our planet. If we invest in rangers, the economic outcomes would be dramatic. The global GDP could rise by $490 billion per year. In 2018, the travel and tourism sector supported 319 million jobs, 10% of total employment, and generated 10.4% of global GDP. Rangers directly support tourism, protecting habitats, teaching park visitors, monitoring species, and responding to emergencies in remote areas. Rangers protect the places that give us clean air, water, food, fertile soil, medicines, and a stable climate. The ranger profession needs to be recognized by the International Labor Organization as an occupation. Rangers are working together to facilitate sufficient training, social safeguards, appropriate equipment, and a guarantee that their teams will have adequate staff to do their work safely and effectively. Professionalize and support rangers, and the return on investment will be high. It now falls on governments, other ranger employers, and their partners to answer the call. Join the global Rangers Deserve More movement.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rohit. So I would like to just start off by giving an introduction to the International Ranger Federation as an organization. And I just want to touch on a few points that have been raised here already. So one was where this photo was taken. It's the World Ranger Congress. It was the 9th World Ranger Congress that was held in Chitwan in Nepal in 2019. And it was out of this that the action plan that was mentioned by Rohit, that the URSA action plan was developed from the declaration that emanated from this gathering. So it's very important to understand, I think, that this global action plan that's been developed has actually, its roots are embedded directly from rangers. The declaration that came out was ranger-led, 550 rangers from 71 different countries, and then that's created this global action plan. So I think that's a very important point to note. So just in terms of the International Ranger Federation, it's an organization that was started in 1992, and we've just celebrated just over the 30-year mark, which is fantastic. But its mission is the Federation's is to develop, advance, and promote throughout the world community the ranger profession and its critical role in the conservation of natural and cultural resources. At the moment, we're just going through a strategic development process, and we have a sort of a draft vision that I thought was worth mentioning here, which is within the next 10 years, IRF will be the standard bearer for the ranger profession. It will be a self-sustaining organization with a strong membership that is the voice of ranger associations and of rangers everywhere. A couple of core functions of the federation is around networking and learning, and that is because it's a federation. It's made up of ranger associations and other organizations. It has, for example, the World Ranger Congresses. It's a fantastic way to get rangers connected, and ranger-to-ranger partnerships and learning takes place. We also have, in terms of the networking and learning, we've just had 3 regional Rangers Congresses that have taken place as well, which takes place between the World Ranger Congresses. The Ranger advocacy and promotion, I think that's the partnership that we've created, particularly with URSA, has been assisting us in driving that area of work. And also elevating the role of rangers, looking at their values and the functions they provide to society in general. And then the ranger sector advancement, looking at professionalization, again, working with a range of partners, particularly in terms of the URSA collaboration that Rohit presented. And I think it's very important in terms of having a professionalized ranger sector. We are almost as a sector playing catch up. As Rohit said, we're not recognized as a profession, but also the world needs a professional ranger workforce to deliver more. So just a breakdown of the structure of the International Ranger Federation. So there's obviously we've got our regional associations, and some are set up, some are in the process of being set up. For example, Latin American Ranger Federation is in the process of becoming a full member, but our role is that, or strength is that we have regional representation, which then goes down to a national and subnational level as well. So it's very important that the IRF can provide that platform for rangers who are out there in the field to access or feed in to global information and decision making. So in terms of the membership, sitting at 171 members, 127 of them are ranger associations from 78 different countries. So pretty good spread from around the world in terms of the regions, which is really exciting, and it's continually growing. I think it's important just to touch on this point, which relates to what Claude was mentioning about who is a ranger. I think often we have this perception that a ranger is a person who is in a camouflage uniform, has a rifle, wanders around, carries out law enforcement. And I think that's very important that we're trying to break that picture down. Rangers are far more than that, and far more diverse as well. So we define it as a person who is responsible for safeguarding nature, cultural and historical heritage, and protecting the rights and well-being of present and future generations. So it's important to note it's obviously in terms of securing nature, but also cultural and historical heritage as a function of rangers. They're representatives of authorities, organizations, or communities. They work in protected and conserved areas and wider land and seascapes, whether state, regional, communal, indigenous, or private, in line with legal and institutional frameworks. So when we talk about rangers, it's not necessarily a person who wakes up in the morning and puts on a uniform. Rangers can be people who are indigenous, who come from communities, who are safeguarding their own areas and landscapes. And I think that's important to note, that we also elevate their roles as well and support them better. So rangers have many different names as well. So when we think of rangers, there are many different terms that encompass the work that rangers carry out. So we had to find a word, which is ranger, but in many different countries, they're called community game scouts, wardens, whatever it might be. So we must also understand that is encompassing of rangers. So I think it's important where we are here, we're talking about rangers, the essential work that they carry out as frontline planetary health professionals. And rangers are essential on-the-ground planetary health professionals and represent a critical sector that is undervalued, capacitated, and supported. The way the International Ranger Federation sees it is that we're at quite a pivotal point. When we're talking about global targets and we're looking to try and achieve them, we need to be talking about the work that rangers do and the important role that they will play in helping us achieve these targets. So our role going forward is to advocate for the professionalization of rangers. So we've got rangers now, but we want to professionalize them so that they are more effective out in the field. They're better supported and motivated as well. Also to ensure better recognition of the role of rangers in sustainable development, and very important in terms of understanding the value that they provide to broader society. and also how they are integrated into society. We put up these barriers of rangers and communities, but rangers are from communities, and they work very closely. And one of the things that we've done around that to build up trust and so on is, for example, implementing a code of conduct, the first ranger code of conduct that's been developed. And I think that's a very important step going forward. So just to finish off, is that I think it would be very important to see how we can add the who is going to do the work on the ground to get us to these targets that are going to be set at this gathering. And so we would like to see rangers and the work of rangers embedded in those global policies going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Rohit, for this. Excellent. What a great introduction to this conversation. Really, really appreciate it. And it strikes me it's not only the who, but the how of getting the world there in terms of area-based conservation targets. Doing it inclusively and effectively, and the role of rangers in that is critically important. So thank you so much for sharing the work you do. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Lisa Faraway, who is the program manager of the Global Wildlife Program with the World Bank. Lisa, over to you for our next panel.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. And I'll just invite the three panelists to come up to stage at the same time so we have a bit less disruption. So Global Wildlife Program is very pleased to be a partner in this event. The Global Wildlife Program brings together 30 countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America to combat illegal wildlife trade, protect wildlife and their habitats, and promote wildlife-based economies. And so many of these projects in the GWP, supporting rangers is a critical part of those projects. So that's why we're delighted to be here today. And as per Global Wildlife Program event STAR, we're bringing together a range of voices and different perspectives, but all working towards a common goal. So with that, I'll introduce our panel here. We're going to have a nice little chat. You can perhaps take your masks off too, gentlemen, so everyone can see your faces. So first up, we have Professor Edson Gandiwa, who is the Director of Scientific Services at Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife, which is one of the participating countries in the GWP. Next, we have Giovanni Reyes, a Kankanay indigenous community member and the president of the ICCA Consortium in the Philippines. And he's also a member of the GEF Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group. And third, we have Johannes Haas, Senior Policy Officer on Biodiversity in the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, which many of you might know as BMZ, in Germany. And before we get started today, I just want to give a shout out to any rangers that may be listening in on the live stream. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for all of your efforts. And this event today is to recognize your efforts. And we also have on the screen behind me here, Patience, a ranger in Zimbabwe who's joining us on the screen. And I'm going to use her to help kick us off with our panel discussion today. So in 2018, we had a Global Wildlife Program annual conference event in Zambia in Zimbabwe. And Indonesia was there, and they were so inspired by Zimbabwe's women ranger workforce that they took what they saw back to Indonesia and they established their own women's ranger workforce. And since then, a lot of the other countries participating in Asia are interested in doing the same thing. I'm not sure how many of you saw the Earthshot Awards last week, but within those, one of the awards went to the Queensland Indigenous Women's Rangers Network in Australia, and they won an Earthshot Prize for their efforts conserving the Great Barrier Reef and for building the next generation of women rangers. And in Queensland, the percentage of Indigenous rangers that is women is only 20%. And they're doing great efforts to increase that number and build a more inclusive workforce. So that award recognizes the importance of rangers and also the success of women rangers. And I'm going to use that to pose my first question to Edson. So Edson, increasing evidence from around the world suggests that bringing women into ranger forces enhances community relations and is more effective at intelligence gathering. So have you seen any evidence to this effect in Zimbabwe, given the great emphasis that you have on bringing women into ranger work?
Thank you very much. Good morning. Indeed, increasing the role of women, particularly in the ranger workforce, is something which is very, very of interest. Zimbabwe has a very good history in terms of ensuring that women play a critical role as rangers in conservation. I will just give one key example, which you have given as patients shown here, from the one community-led initiative, which we call Akashinga. So Akashinga is a project which is in the community-led conservation, which we call Campfire in Zimbabwe, that is in a communal areas management program for indigenous resources. So in 2017, the International Anti-Poaching Federation started an initiative where they recruited women, mostly were those that were marginalized, those that could not find employment. These were employed in an area called Fundundu, which is next to Manapos National Park. They started with a group of under 30 women, and these women were rigorously trained, and they then were recruited as rangers. They have good success over the years, where they have been able to ensure that the wildlife area in that community conserved area were much more promoted in terms of ensuring that the habitat was safe, and their numbers were also on the increase. And that area gives a buffer between the Manapos National Park and the broader community. So that's one success where women have been actually recruited from areas that they had no hope of finding employment. And this is the first only women ranger force in Zimbabwe, which is resident in a community, which are contributing to the targets, ensuring that Zimbabwe's conservation is actually diversified. We include women in ensure that they get the benefits of working as a ranger, but more importantly, contribute to the conservation of the national heritage. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Edson, for starting us off today. And I'll just point out, there's a really good global study by Professor Joni Seeger, who is also the Global Wildlife Program Gender Advisor. And she completed a report for URSA, and it's called Towards Gender Equality in the Ranger Workforce. So I'd encourage people to have a look at that report as well. So moving on now, that Rangers is not just about guys and gals in uniform, I wanted to ask Giovanni a question about the role of the informal or community-based Ranger workforce, which is equally important. Giovanni, the role of the community-based Ranger workforce is complementary to the government-enabled Ranger workforce. Based on your experience, what do you see as the unique role of the informal workforce in countries and regions to help them achieve their conservation goals?
Well, indigenous peoples are naturally stewards of the environment, given that they have strong spiritual and cultural values that they attach over these lands. So that makes them the natural stewards of the areas. For example, in Mindanao, we have here the endangered species of the eagles. Indigenous peoples there look at the eagle not just as a bird species or an endangered species, but they look at it as a stakeholder, one that warns them of dangers that can happen in the community. So they listen to the voice or to the behavior of the bird, and they can determine if a storm is oncoming or if there is an attack against their security. That is why they look at the bird as someone that has to be taken as a stakeholder, and therefore they have to protect its habitat. So naturally, when you talk to women and indigenous youth, that's the number one reason why they say that we have to protect the habitat of the eagle, and in doing so, conserve the area. And of course, by conserving the area, they provide lowland areas or agricultural areas of sufficient water supply, so that these farmers can produce rice that they in turn will supply to the nation. So an indigenous community conserved area in relation to species and in relation to food security, that is what the ranger as an indigenous person protects. So when you talk about endangered species, you must also talk about the spiritual and cultural values that are attached on it. And that's the reason why we still have few forests and rivers left in the Philippines. And 75% of our key biodiversity areas are under the protection of informal rangers.
Thank you, Giovanni. And I think that showed clearly the importance of the informal ranger workforce. And thank you for sharing the story of the eagle, which I think is so interesting, and also for mentioning youth, which is, of course, something else we need to think about in terms of professionalizing the ranger workforce and making it an attractive employment opportunity for youth. And one of the things we're discussing today is how it needs additional investment. So thankfully, we have a donor on the panel here. And with that, I'd like to pose the next question to Johannes. So Johannes, we need more investment to support rangers to tackle the multiple threats to conservation and play the multiple roles that we heard Chris and Rohit talking about earlier. So what does BMZ see as the priorities for investment? And what are some of the successes that you can share with us from those investments?
Yes, thank you. Good morning also from my side. And as you have been asking, what I can offer to this panel is a bit the perspective of donors on things and what we're trying to do. And I will try to be quick, of course, and brief. But I want to start by saying that for us as BMZ, we are a development cooperation ministry. So this is a short abbreviation for a long name, stands for Development Cooperation. And for us, it's always about, of course, biodiversity conservation, but we always look on the social side of things as well. And I think protected areas are not only important for conserving biodiversity, it has been said before, but they are also really vital for securing ecosystem services and for local livelihoods. And that's why BMZ, a large part of our biodiversity portfolio is flowing into protected area management. And here we follow a human rights-based approach. We try to orient on development, and we try to promote participative management approaches and also alternative income sources for the rangers for one, but also for the communities surrounding the protected areas. And so in all of this, the rangers which we talk about today obviously play a central role. And I think it is important to underline what has been said before, that there really is need also to create awareness that rangers are essential in working on a global challenge, namely the Target 3, which is currently negotiated. So they are not only a phase of law enforcement, and they're often also connected with so-called militarized conservation, but it's different. They have a larger role to play, and we as donors also want to stress that. But to actually fulfill this larger role and to be a link between nature and people, actually, this does not come from itself. I think this effectiveness of ranger work depends on a couple of things. For one, there's capacity, there's accountability, competence, there's also respect. These people must have the chance to actually have a good salary and earn enough to feed their families. And this is where I think BMZ can have a role. First of all, we try to invest in training and education, but also we try to provide equipment for rangers. I want to turn on a couple of examples how we do this. I don't want to bore you with the whole long list which I have in front of me, but I want to name a couple of them. First of all, the Legacy Landscapes Fund is a prominent initiative which we're funding. Here we're trying to give long-term funding to protected areas of 15 or 30 years. All of them, the plan is to fund these protected areas for perpetuity. And I'm mentioning this because here philanthropic and public funding is combined. And I'm also mentioning this because Patience, the woman we talked about before, is working in Gonareju in Zimbabwe. That's one of the parks which is already part of the Legacy Landscapes Fund. So this long-term planning security is one thing which we try to do with this innovative model. A second point which I want to make, or example I want to give, concerns the COVID-19 crisis. We still have masks on our faces. We right now not, fortunately, but you are. And during this COVID-19 crisis, in many parks around the world, the revenue broke completely down. Not only, but also in Africa. The African Parks directors, they rang the alarm bell, and we tried to answer at least and give a part. And so we, for example, in Tanzania, stepped in with so-called emergency funding to provide running costs for ranger patrols, for GPS, for veterinary equipment as well. And then I want to finish, also name our cooperation with the URSA, so the Universal Ranger Support Alliance, which we talked about before. Here we also involved, and we try to help in the dissemination of the Ranger Code of Conduct. It has been translated in several languages, and there had been workshops with rangers themselves. Also, we were enabling that it was presented at important forums like the Asian Parks Congress or APEC in Kigali this year. And I think these are already enough examples, and I took enough time. So, I will stop here.
Thank you, Johannes. And I think Johannes really well showed the contributions of rangers, not just to biodiversity conservation, but to development. It's not just about protecting the ecological values of protected areas. They also have such a critical role in building local community livelihoods and supporting local economies. And one of the things that Johannes touched on was the need for capacity development. And that's where we want to go next. So being a ranger is, it's a tough job. You can see on the screen, it's a physically demanding job. You need equipment. It's a dangerous job. But you have to take on a lot of roles. So you need capacity development and training so that you can do these effectively. So, and if I think about the Global Wildlife Program projects that's supporting protected area management, I would say every single one of them includes some support to build the capacity of rangers. So Edson, how has your department supported ranger training? And where do you think are the opportunities to enhance capacity development to professionalize the ranger workforce? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. So in terms of the Zimbabwean ranger training program, let me just start to say in Zimbabwe, conservation basically is divided into three main distinct areas. So we have the state areas which are mostly run by the Wildlife Authority, that is the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority. Then we have the private areas which are game farms, more private, run as a business by private players. And lastly, we have the communal areas which are mostly run by the rural district councils under the Campfire program. So the Wildlife Authority, basically Zimpax, we have a training college which we call the Zimbabwe Institute of Wildlife Conservation. In that college, we have various programs. The first program which we do, whenever we recruit those that would be rangers, we have a basic paramilitary course that we train all those that comes through. So it's a rigorous training program, mostly running from 4 to 6 weeks as a basic training. And those that would pass it would then be recruited into the ranger workforce for Zimpax. Then after 2 or 3 years, we also do refresher trainings. And I like the presentation already given by Chris. What we do cover are the basic elements of ensuring that not only do you look at combating poaching, but you also have the human elements of making sure that you are also interfacing with tourists, you are also able to manage fires, and you also have the scientific aspects where whenever you go in the field, you are able then to do the same, to get information. We also extend the same to private and also to wildlife, to the communal areas where they can come and have their staff, scouts also trained. There are opportunities that are there. First, resources are limiting. As a college, we train limited numbers. And our aspiration is to ensure that we expand the college so that we are able then to bring more ranger forces that are not only within Zimpax, but also private and communal. More importantly, as we train, we need the key tools of trade. At times, I'm sure for rangers, we need the boots on the ground. But at times, we have limitations in ensuring that the best of the available tools of trade are always available. Also, the issue of technology, I think, is one opportunity where we would need then the basic available technology to be also cascaded down to those rangers from those that are mostly in the global north to come also to the global south. I think this is something which is very, very important to ensure that we bridge the gap in terms of technology. Nowadays that there is drones, we need the skills also to be imparted to the rangers. So those are opportunities that I see are much more available to collaborate with Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Thank you, Edson. And I think they're showing, again, the range of diverse roles that rangers take on. And you mentioned conservation technology there. So Global Wildlife Program is doing a knowledge exchange on that in coming months, and I hope that you'll join us there at that event. So we've looked now at the multiple roles. Let's shift across and look at a case study of how rangers' efforts are delivering multiple benefits. So I'll go back to Giovanni again. So Giovanni, what are some of the positive impacts that you've witnessed through your work in the Philippines, including benefits to local communities, ecosystems, and economies? What would you say is most needed to scale up those benefits?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. There was a GEF-funded project that we implemented in 2016 up to 2019. And for the first time in 30 years of protected area systems in the Philippines, the country was pushed at the forefront of inclusive conservation, at least for the Asia region, because of the leadership of indigenous peoples who took it upon themselves that decision-making when it comes to conservation must be in the hands of the communities, and the role of government is merely to facilitate the process. The role of NGOs who were in the project also were the function was delineated in facilitative terms, but the decision-making is in the hands of indigenous communities. And here was an opportunity where indigenous knowledge about the terrains, about boundaries, about names of mountains, creeks, rivers, and watersheds, these were translated into its physical dimension in the form of a map, so that there is an evidence base to show to policymakers and to scientists that here is a conserved area managed and conserved under traditional governance systems of indigenous peoples. That was the impact of the 2016 to 2019 GEF-funded project that IPIS led. And of course, in terms of climate change, we were able to map 158,000 hectares of ICCAs, or Indigenous Community Conserved Areas. And when we had this subjected to a scientific analysis by our colleagues, by our allies in the World Resource Institute in Washington, they found out that the tiny segment of our 5 million to 7 million ancestral domains, it is capable of capturing 10.5 million tons of carbon. 158,000 hectares is capable of holding 10.5 million tons of carbon, or equivalent to the gas emissions of 7 million cars annually. But that is not known to the world. So the project made it visible. The impact of the project made the contributions of indigenous peoples on climate change and biodiversity more visible and more aware. The combination of indigenous knowledge and science, well, these were clashing values, but we made sure that the merger of these two clashing values were based on rights-based approach, so that the respectful manner between indigenous knowledge holders and scientific analysts were respectful of each other's position. So that pushed the country at the forefront of inclusive conservation, at least for the Asia region. And I mentioned that in yesterday's panel, where I was a member of the panel, and the UN CBD Secretariat was there too. I said that in reference to Target 3, Target 3 should at least show the relationship between the commitments to the GBF and the collective ownership of lands that are considered the heart of the planet. Because if to a human person the most protected is the heart, to indigenous peoples the most protected would be the indigenous community conserved areas. You destroy that and you destroy the ecosystem. In the same way as when you destroy a person's heart, that person will surely die. So that's the impact of the project that we implemented in 2016 to 2019.
Thanks, Giovanni, and I think that shows the the long investment of the GEF in supporting protected areas in GEF and also in ranges, and also highlights the link between nature and climate, which everyone here knows is essential. We're not going to meet global climate change targets without leveraging the power of nature. And we need ranges to do that. Rohit showed before how few ranges there are out there protecting these ecosystems. So this is why we're here today, to talk about why we need more investment. And back to Johannes again, who, as he said, has a long list of initiatives of what BMZ has shared. What's needed to increase investment in ranges? So what kind of evidence or data would you say is needed to help governments and donors make informed decisions about investment in ranges to help direct funds to where it is most needed?
Thank you. Does it work? Yeah, thanks. First of all, the data is important, which you mentioned before. So studies and numbers and facts, as Rohit presented earlier, are useful. Because, I mean, here on an event like this, with an audience like this, it's really easy to convince people of the importance of investing in ranges, but this can be different. And also for us in Germany, we are sometimes confronted with the critical public or critical parliamentarians when they are challenging examples. Here we first of all need data and powerful stories, but we also need to be sure and confident about, first of all, quality of the work we're doing. Second, we need a professionalization of the sector, which has been mentioned before. And we also need to be sure that rangers are not adversaries to locals, but that they work together. And on this first point, on the quality, we, for example, try to support the IUCN Green List standard, which can be one tool to show that protected areas are managed equitably and also effectively. On the professionalization, I already talked about that before, how we had a role in the Ranger Code of Conduct and its dissemination, but of course it doesn't stop there. And to be very brief on the third point, we try to also, and that's why I'm happy to sit next to Giovanni here, try to also put a stronger focus on supporting collaboration between rangers and community rangers. For example, in Laos, there's an example of this, but we want to put that in a stronger focus in the future, also because otherwise Target 3 and its implementation, I personally hope that there will be 30%, but we will see. But this will only be possible if there are also innovative approaches and a different understanding of protected areas than up to now.
I think that well sets out what is needed to build the business case for more investment in ranges. So my fabulous panelists here have finished right on time. So we do have time to take a couple of questions from the audience, if anyone has any. You've heard the expertise that we have here, the range of issues to discuss. So does anyone have a question? If so, just raise your hand and we can bring a microphone to you. Yep, just one here. Thank you, Hannah. And I'll ask you to introduce yourself first, and then if you're directing the question to a certain person, please say who the question is for.
Okay, my name is Binbin Li. I'm a professor at Duke Kunshan University in China. So before I throw the question out, I just want to share some experiences in China. And so we actually did this national study on the occupation stress and satisfaction of rangers in China. And then the results are pretty surprised. 1/3 of the rangers want to quit their job. But the satisfaction is about like 60%. And a lot of the reason relate to their rewarding system, the salary. But also there is a question relate to the recognition from the society. And also because of the uneven development of China, rangers want their kids to have good education, their elder family members can have good health care. So they actually send their family members to the cities or towns. So they spend less than 5 days per month with their family. So there's a lot of marriage issues. And also we figured out there's aging issues with the rangers because young people do not want to join this task force. And also we see the loss of connection between the local community with the nature because a lot of young people, they can get more money in the cities and they get less from being a ranger. And also they feel afraid to go into forest. So we think actually to provide this platform and recognition and keeping the rangers can reinforce like the connection of the local community with the nature, who are the guards of the protected area. They're the cornerstone of the cornerstone for biodiversity conservation. But then we realize the lack of funding is the most important things. And for a lot of funding agencies, they do not want to invest in people because for them it's hard to evaluate. So what could be done to establish this evaluation system, whether your funding are well spent and also investing in people? What you can see is not just once after 1 year you can see the outcome. It's like continuous, it could be long term. So what people would like to see, whether their money are better invested and evaluated so we can attract more money and also mobilize maybe like private sectors into this game. So I think the question is for you, Johannes.
Thank you. So yes, I think an important point which you just mentioned was what you actually said in the end of your question, namely the role of different donors. So I think as a public sector, we have certain administrative barriers which we always have to fulfill. We always also have to, of course, explain where the money goes. And this is why, as I've touched before, we need some feedback also what happens with it. We also need quality standards because there's just so much and it's so far away from where we actually sit in our headquarters. So we need the feedback from the field. And then we need, I think, to, as you have said, cooperate with other actors as well. I in the beginning mentioned the Legacy Landscapes Fund. I'll do it again because here private and public donors work together, and we're trying to get away from these 3 or 4 year project cycles where you do something and then you need some time before you actually have the project set up, and then it starts to run and then it's already over, and then you get a second phase and that's it, and it starts from the beginning. And we try to get away from this. And we think it's going great in this example, but I also want to be honest, it's not easy. We also have to really explain what we're doing in the political sector in Germany because it's a new thinking. And for explaining this and for promoting innovative approaches, as I said, feedback from the field is really important, data is really important, and then there's always these stories. So we heard some powerful ones here. There's much more to be heard here at the conference, and this is also what arrives actually when we talk to, for example, parliamentarians. I hope that answers a bit of your question. I don't know if others want to jump in.
Were there any other questions? Oh, sorry, Giovanni, you were going to, please go ahead.
In addition to what my colleague mentioned, there are also already modalities of funding flows directly to communities. We have tested this during the 2016-2019 GEF funded project, where the money went directly to the communities through intermediaries that have traditionally are trusted by the communities. They have a history of working relations with the communities, and so the funding mechanism and the funding report monitoring were mostly by the allies who have specialty in analyzing funding mechanisms. Of course, indigenous peoples do not have the capacity to do that. So, but they have partners with a history of trust and with a history of working relations with the IP communities. So they were one with government as implementing partners to manage the financial aspect. But the work in conservation is, as I mentioned a while ago, was in the hands of indigenous communities because they are in the best position to determine exactly how to scale up the results of their relationship with nature.
Thank you, Giovanni. Any other questions? We've probably got time for one more. Okay, here in the middle, thank you. Again, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Leo Vigildo José. I work for the National Administration for Conservation Areas in Mozambique. My question is sort of, can I take masks? Okay, thank you. My question will start with a comment. People actually protect what they value. That is the comment. But what we are witnessing is that the nature is suffering from huge threats. Sorry for my English, I usually speak in Portuguese. But what we are witnessing is that the nature is suffering some threats like poaching and human pressure over the natural resources. But still, how can we bring the communities, which are the first rangers of the nature, how can we bring the communities to increase the protection of the nature? Because we are witnessing that still the poaching is increasing in Mozambique. We do witness some problems related with poaching. So how can we, is a general question, how can we increase the value adding of the nature by the communities? Hope I have been understood. Thank you.
It's a good question, and Edson, I might invite you to come in on that question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think a very difficult question, particularly even for governments. I'm sure for Zimbabwe we have the Campfire program, which has been well known. And just to say, under the GEF 6 project, which we are currently running in Zimbabwe, we have innovated our community conservation program. So first, we have put in place conservancies where we have game farms for communities. So we have set up, currently we are planning to set up 6. Just 1 or 2 have already been set up. So the issue is to diversify the community type of basic wildlife conservation where we enhance the benefits to communities. Many a time, COVID has taught us that if we rely on one form of revenue, particularly for Zimbabwe, you can imagine, because we have sustainable use. We were more into sustainable use, but now we have seen we need also to have ecotourism. But if the tourists come, they need to see the wildlife. So it's more about ensuring that we diversify the community-based conservation initiatives. But more importantly, even issues of the other revenue streams like carbon credits. So all this needs now to be evaluated in a broader conservation initiative which links the bigger part of the park so that people can accept to live in harmony with wildlife. More so, the benefits are accruing to them. So, and currently, Zimbabwe has also reviewed the Campfire program. I think one of the limitations over the time has been to do with our legislation, which has been more prohibitive for communities. I am happy to say, even with the capacity building under GEF 6 project, we have been given an opportunity for communities to upscale their game rangers, which means that we are also, they are seeing their own children being employed in community projects, also seeing the direct investment in wildlife ranches, which would then also increase the diversified forms of revenue that they will get. I'm sure as long as incentives are higher for communities, they will see the value of wildlife. But if they are incurring costs of human-wildlife conflict, even issues of them not being accepted by those that are working in wildlife, they will always value less of wildlife. So I think it's more about the good legislative working with partners that are more into development, investment, because we need that. Otherwise, there are limitations in terms of what the governments can do alone. We need to be inclusive to have others come and support. Thank you.
Did you want to come in on this one, Giovanni?
Yeah. When a climate change impact devastated a city in Mindanao, indigenous peoples came out to say that the only way we can mitigate the disaster is to protect the forests above it. So they attracted the attention of the city government, so that the relationship now is based on payment for ecological service, something to compensate for the role that the indigenous community conserved area have for preventing climate change impacts such as massive flooding and soil erosion, which killed 6,000 people in just 1 hour in 2012, and then again it repeated. We have 12 to 13 typhoons in the Philippines annually, and And this is now where the role of informal rangers appear, because their protection of ICCAs means the protection also of urban areas. And to compensate them, the city government of Cagayan de Oro started to finance rehabilitation, reforestation, and activities that have been identified and prioritized by indigenous communities.
Thank you, Giovanni. And we're at time now. We invited you here to join us for an hour. That hour is up. So I'd like to thank the panelists and get everyone to thank Edson, Giovanni, and Johannes for sharing their insights. And then perhaps invite Hannah.
That's fine. You all can stay up here. Thank you so much. I just have a couple of quick closing thoughts and a little ad for what's next here. So I will not try to restate. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for your questions as well. So right now, the CBD parties are working hard to define the what in terms of area-based targets, conservation targets. Clearly, this event has very much illustrated how the important role of rangers into the who and how of inclusively and effectively meeting those future targets and supporting a diverse ranger workforce as they are the planetary health workers. I think that's a great takeaway here. And if you're familiar with the GEF 8 strategy and programming directions, you'll see that it's based on a healthy planet, healthy people framework. So really nice alignment there. If you're interested in learning more about GEF investments in wildlife conservation and development, there are little flyers with a QR code on the seats. Otherwise, just come up and talk to one of us and get our cards. And we have two other super exciting events at the pavilion today at 1 o'clock on the Amazon Sustainable Landscapes ASL program, and then at 4 p.m. come back to hear more about the Global Wildlife Program and the GEF 8 new integrated program called Wildlife Conservation for Development, WCD. So thank you to all of our panelists, our guests, Lisa, and thanks for all of you joining online as well. And I wanted to send a special regards from the CEO of the GEF Secretariat, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez. This issue is near and dear to his heart. He couldn't be here with us in person today, but he very much sends his thank yous and regards to everybody he's watching online. So thanks so much.